Hashtag outline for when Earth's warriors became legends among the stars. The Zalthari attack came without warning. Epsilon Prime, a flourishing Terran colony on the edge of human space, had never known war. Its people were scientists, engineers, and dreamers, builders of a brighter future. But in the cold vastness of the galaxy, ambition and cruelty thrived. The Zalthari Empire, a war-hardened dominion of conquerors, saw humanity as nothing more than another species to subjugate. They were wrong. Commander Elias Voss stood atop the crumbling battlements of Fort Halcyon, scanning the horizon as darkened skies burned with enemy fire. The Zalthari had landed in force, their warships blotting out the twin suns. The colony's orbital defenses were gone, reduced to drifting wreckage in the void. His earpiece crackled. "Commander, we've lost the eastern barricades. The Zalthari are pushing toward the inner city." Voss clenched his jaw. "Casualties? Too many." A brief pause. "But the militia is still holding." He glanced down at the warriors beside him, Terran Marines, hardened veterans of conflicts back home. They were outnumbered 10-1, cut off from Earth, and left with only scavenged supplies. But they were human. And that meant they were dangerous. Voss activated his comm. "We hold the line. No retreat." A weary chuckle came from Captain Rena Talos, his second-in-command. "That's what I like to hear." The Zalthari forces stormed the ruins with mechanical precision. Towering reptilian beings, encased in heavy battle armor, wielding plasma lances that could melt steel. They were warriors bred for war, veterans of countless conquests. And yet the humans fought like demons. The first wave was met with sniper fire, armor-piercing rounds striking weak points in their exoskeletons. Frag grenades erupted among their ranks, shattering formations. Voss and his team moved like ghosts in the battlefield, striking fast and vanishing into the rubble. But the Zalthari adapted. Their second assault came with overwhelming force, plasma bombardments turning streets to molten slag. The Terrans fell back, drawing the enemy deeper into the city's labyrinthine corridors. Traps were set, explosives rigged to collapse buildings on unsuspecting troops. The battle raged for hours, then stretched into days. What should have been a swift conquest for the Zalthari became a war of attrition. And then, against all odds, a crack appeared in the enemy's armor. Reports came in, Zalthari supply lines disrupted, their command post ambushed. The invaders, expecting a broken and helpless species, found themselves instead facing predators. Voss saw the shift in the enemy's stance, the hesitation in their advance. For the first time, the Zalthari feared the humans. "We can win this," Talos muttered beside him, her voice tinged with exhaustion and awe. Voss nodded, gripping his rifle. "We don't just win. We make sure they never forget us." The warriors of Earth were not just defending their colony. They were carving their names into history. And soon, the galaxy would know their legend. The Zalthari had expected swift victory. Instead, they found themselves bleeding for every inch of ground they took. For 6 days, the battle for Epsilon Prime raged. The once thriving colony was now a charred battleground of collapsed towers, burning streets, and shattered defenses. But humanity still stood. Commander Elias Voss crouched behind a shattered transport vehicle, his armor streaked with dirt and blood. His rifle was running low on ammunition, but he wasn't out yet. A squad of Zalthari warriors moved through the ruins, their glowing visors scanning for survivors. Their war doctrine was clear: leave no enemy standing. Voss gritted his teeth. "Not today." He motioned to his squad, 6 battered but unbroken Marines. They were cut off from the main resistance forces, but that didn't matter. They were hunters now. A Zalthari soldier stomped closer, its plasma lance humming with deadly energy. It loomed over Voss's position, scanning the wreckage, until a sharp whistle echoed. Boom. A makeshift explosive, planted beneath the rubble, detonated with devastating force. The alien's armor cracked, its massive form collapsing under its own weight. Before the others could react, the humans were already on the move. "Hit 'em hard," Voss barked. Gunfire erupted. Armor-piercing rounds found their marks, striking vulnerable joints. Grenades arced through the air, detonating among the Zalthari squad. The towering warriors fell, their death cries drowned by the roar of battle. Voss exhaled, heart pounding. That was one patrol down. But there were thousands more. He tapped his earpiece. Talos, report. A burst of static, then his second-in-command's voice. We've pushed them back from the southern district, but we're running out of munitions. Reinforcements? Voss looked around the burning ruins. We are the reinforcements. A dry chuckle. Figures? They couldn't hold much longer. The Zalthari weren't just attacking anymore, they were adapting. Their latest offensives were smarter, their troop movements unpredictable. The longer this battle dragged on, the less chance humanity had to survive. Voss knew what had to be done. We go on the offensive, he said, voice like steel. If we stay defensive, they'll grind us down. We take the fight to them. Silence. Then Talos spoke, her voice grim but resolute. Where do we hit? Voss looked toward the distant skyline. The Zalthari command hub loomed in the distance, shielded by layers of heavy defenses. It was the beating heart of their invasion. If humanity wanted to turn the tide, they had to strike at its core. We're going to bring hell to their doorstep. The battle for Epsilon Prime was far from over, but Commander Elias Voss knew that survival depended on more than just their tenacity. Humanity had to forge alliances, and they had to do it quickly. As Zalthari ships darkened the skies and more enemy troops poured in, Voss realized that their victory wasn't just about fighting harder, it was about fighting smarter, with the strength of many, not just the few. The Gervani were the first to respond. Voss stood in the dimly lit war room aboard the human flagship Triumph, watching the hollow projection of the alien council members. The Gervani, tall, angular beings with sharp features and the kind of cold intellect that had made them masters of strategy, were no strangers to conflict. But they were not a warlike species. They had, for centuries, resisted the predations of the Zalthari, their planet just a small sliver of territory on the edge of the galaxy. To them, humanity was a revelation. We cannot fight this battle alone, Commander Voss, said Kairos, the leader of the Gervana delegation. His voice was soft but carried the weight of millennia of survival. We know how to fight, but we do not have the numbers. Voss didn't hesitate. Then we'll give you the numbers. You supply the brains, and we'll bring the muscle. Together, we'll break their back. Kairos tilted his head, his cold eyes reflecting a spark of curiosity. What makes you think your species can withstand the might of the Zalthari? Voss grinned, a flash of defiance in his eyes. We don't have the luxury of losing. The Gervani nodded slowly, their sharp minds already processing the potential of the alliance. A treaty was swiftly forged, with terms laid out to allow for joint operations, exchange of technology, and most importantly, a shared vision of overthrowing the Zalthari. But the Gervani were only the beginning. Within weeks, other oppressed species came forward, each with their own scars from the Zalthari conquest. The Targoth, a warrior race renowned for their brutal combat style and unmatched strength, joined the alliance, eager to finally strike back at their tormentors. Though initially wary of humanity's capacity for war, they quickly saw the value in fighting alongside Earth's warriors. The Targoth were everything the Gervani were not: ruthless, brutal, and merciless. Their armies clashed with the Zalthari in a way that made even the Zalthari question their supremacy. The two species, though vastly different, began to form a deadly synergy. Voss met with the leaders of these new allies in a darkened war room aboard the Triumph, where holographic maps of the galaxy flickered in the air. The Targoth were taller than humans, their tusked faces stern and intimidating, but they respected strength. They saw in humanity something they respected: courage in the face of impossible odds. This alliance is the only chance we have, Voss said, his voice firm. We've all been crushed beneath the boot of the Zalthari, but together, we can rise. Together, we can tear their empire apart. Talon Prime, the leader of the Targoth, growled low in his throat, the sound like a distant thunderclap. We fight, and we kill the Zalthari. The alliance was made, and the first joint strike was planned. The Zalthari, though formidable, had never faced the combined might of three races that had been united by a single goal: freedom. And humanity, once a small, insignificant force in a galactic landscape, had now become the linchpin of a coalition that was about to change the galaxy forever. But the Zalthari were no fools. They knew something had shifted in the balance of power. They could sense the growing resistance, the rising defiance. And they weren't about to let it go unchecked. As Voss surveyed the preparations for their first large-scale offensive, he couldn't help but think about the magnitude of what they were about to do. The galaxy was changing. Humanity was no longer the prey. They were predators now, and the Zalthari would soon learn that the legends of Earth's warriors were not just tales to be whispered in the dark. They were coming to life. The galaxy's future was about to be decided at a crossroads. Orion's Gate, the strategic hyperlane nexus that connected half of the known galaxy, was the crown jewel of the Zalthari Empire. Whoever controlled it controlled the flow of resources, the movement of fleets, and the very heartbeat of the war itself. Commander Elias Voss stared at the holographic map of the system, his hands folded behind his back. He was flanked by his allies, the sharp-eyed Gervana tactician, Kyrus, and the imposing Targoth warlord, Talon Prime. The stars above Orion's Gate blazed in their view screens, surrounded by a network of heavily fortified Zalthari battle stations and fleets. "This is it," Voss said, voice low and focused. "Control Orion's Gate, and we control the Zalthari's ability to wage war on the rest of the galaxy." Kyrus nodded, his long fingers tapping at the console in front of him. "We must strike with precision. They have superior numbers, and their defenses are formidable. But we have something they don't." His eyes flickered to Voss. "We have humanity's ingenuity," Voss grinned. "And their arrogance. They'll never see us coming." The plan was set, and the attack began at the break of dawn. It wasn't a direct assault. They couldn't afford to fight on the Zalthari's terms. Instead, the coalition forces would hit the enemy's blind spots, attack their supply lines, and disrupt their communications. The goal was to weaken their hold on the system before the main offensive struck. The Gervani launched the first wave, using their advanced stealth technology to infiltrate Zalthari stations unnoticed. Small teams of highly trained operatives targeted key command centers and crippled their long-range sensors. Meanwhile, the Targoth used their brute strength and fearsome combat prowess to stage skirmishes at critical locations, sowing confusion and forcing the Zalthari to divide their forces. But the true strike came when Voss's human fleet entered the system. The Terran ships were smaller, faster, and far more maneuverable than the lumbering Zalthari dreadnoughts. Earth's engineers had crafted specialized weapons for this battle: laser-guided missiles that could pierce the toughest armor, cloaking technology that allowed them to appear and disappear in the blink of an eye, and innovative battle tactics that kept the Zalthari guessing. The first clash came in the asteroid belt surrounding the gate, a chaotic exchange of laser fire and debris. Terran pilots, led by Captain Rena Talos, executed flawless maneuvers, diving in and out of the asteroid field with expert precision. They targeted Zalthari supply ships, sending them tumbling into oblivion, while their smaller ships harried the enemy, leading them into traps. As Voss watched the battle unfold from the command center of the flagship Triumph, his heart raced. It wasn't just a fight for a hyperlane nexus anymore. It was a fight for humanity's place in the galaxy. "We're breaking through their lines," Talos reported over the comms, her voice crisp despite the chaos. "We're hitting them where it hurts, but we need reinforcements." Voss's mind worked quickly.
"No.
"Hold your ground. The real blow is coming." Kyrus stepped forward, tapping at the glowing holographic interface. "The Zalthari are scrambling their forces to respond. The gate's defenses are still intact, but they are vulnerable." Voss looked up, his eyes hard. "Then let's finish this." The final phase of the assault began when the human fleet made its move toward the hyperlane gateway. The Zalthari, realizing their defensive positions were collapsing, scrambled to regroup, sending their dreadnoughts and warships to intercept. The Triumph and its fleet, however, were not interested in a direct confrontation. Instead, They set course for the heart of the gate's massive station, a colossal structure that served as both a communications hub and a military fortress. As the Terran ships approached the station, their cloaking technology engaged. For a few brief moments, they were ghosts, moving unnoticed in the vastness of space. The Zalthari, unaware of the incoming strike, continued to marshal their forces. Then, as planned, the fleet emerged from the shadows.
Now,
Voss's voice rang out through the comms. The Terran ships unleashed everything they had. Missile barrages, laser cannons, and EMP pulses rained down upon the station's defenses. The Zalthari scrambled to defend, but their once untouchable stronghold was now under siege. The station's shield generators failed under the relentless assault, leaving it exposed to direct fire. In a coordinated attack, the Jervani and Targoth launched their final assault, storming the station from multiple angles, overwhelming the Zalthari defenders with brutal precision and relentless force. It was chaos, but it was a chaos the Zalthari had never faced. Humanity and its allies were everywhere, striking without mercy. And then, with a deafening explosion, Orion's gate fell. The station crumpled, its core igniting in a spectacular burst of energy. The Zalthari fleet, no longer able to resupply or coordinate effectively, began to retreat. Their control of the hyperlane was shattered, their strategic advantage gone. Voss watched the carnage unfold from the bridge of the Triumph, his breath slow but steady. The battle was won.
For now.
We did it, Talos said, her voice filled with awe. We've crippled their empire. Voss nodded, but his gaze hardened. This is just the beginning. Orion's gate had fallen, but the war was far from over. The Zalthari would regroup, but now they knew what humanity, and its allies, were capable of. And that knowledge would be their undoing. The victory at Orion's gate had sent shockwaves through the galaxy. The Zalthari Empire, once thought invincible, had been dealt a crippling blow. Humanity and its allies had disrupted their hyperlane nexus, severing their supply lines and communications. But as the dust settled and the celebrations began, Commander Elias Voss knew the truth. The Zalthari wouldn't go down without a fight. In the aftermath of the attack, the coalition forces regrouped, licking their wounds and making strategic plans for the future. But deep down, Voss felt the impending storm. The Zalthari were relentless, and their retaliation was only a matter of time. Days after the fall of Orion's gate, a new transmission crackled through the fleet's communication systems. The message was simple, but its impact was immediate. Prepare for the reckoning. Voss stood at the command center of the Triumph, staring at the screen as the encrypted message was decoded. The Zalthari had issued their warning. The long arm of their empire was reaching out, and they would stop at nothing to reclaim their lost power. We've made them angry, Talos muttered, her voice tense. And they've got a lot of anger to spare. Kairos, standing at the helm, narrowed his eyes. It's not just anger. It's a warning. They are mobilizing every fleet in their arsenal. They will come for us, full force. Voss clenched his jaw. Let them come. The Zalthari were true to their word. A massive war fleet emerged from the depths of the galaxy, a tidal wave of destruction hurtling toward the coalition forces. In their desperation, they called upon the greatest military asset at their disposal, the Imperator-class dreadnoughts, monstrous warships capable of annihilating entire fleets. These titans of the Zalthari arsenal were their pride and joy, each one an unstoppable force of nature, designed to instill fear and ensure their dominance. Voss watched in grim silence as the coordinates for the advancing Zalthari fleet filled the screen. Thousands of ships, including the dreaded dreadnoughts, were on an intercept course with the human and allied forces. There was no mistaking it. This would be the decisive battle. We'll need every ounce of firepower we've got, Voss said, his voice steady but filled with resolve. This is their final play. They're coming to wipe us out. Kyra's sharp eyes flickered across the screen, assessing the situation. If they strike now, we'll be overwhelmed. We need to hit them first, disrupt their formation before they can unite their forces. Voss nodded. The plan was set. Their best chance for survival rested on a bold, decisive move. Humanity and its allies would engage the Zalthari fleet in a battle unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. As the Zalthari fleet approached, the coalition's forces readied for combat. The human ships, still smaller but far more nimble than their opponents, flanked the mighty dreadnoughts, picking off isolated targets with deadly precision. The Gervani, masters of strategy, directed their forces with meticulous care, sending well-timed strikes to cripple the Zalthari's command infrastructure. Meanwhile, the Targoth, fierce and relentless, brought the full might of their warriors to bear, engaging in brutal close-quarters combat with the enemy's battlecruisers and strike vessels. Voss stood at the helm of the Triumph, his heart racing as the first shots were fired. The battle was chaos, a symphony of laser fire and explosions. His command ship darted between enemy vessels, outmaneuvering the Zalthari's brute strength with speed and precision. It was all about tactics, every move calculated, every shot deliberate. "We're in position," Talos reported, her voice tight. "Now or never, Commander." Voss gritted his teeth. "Execute the plan." The Triumph surged forward, firing its weapons with pinpoint accuracy. The entire fleet followed, launching a coordinated strike on the Zalthari's most vulnerable vessels, their supply ships and smaller frigates. It was a brutal, rapid assault, designed to cripple the Zalthari's ability to sustain their massive fleet. Within moments, entire sections of the Zalthari fleet were in disarray, struggling to reorganize and fend off the relentless strikes. But it wasn't enough. The Zalthari dreadnoughts continued their advance, impervious to all but the heaviest of firepower. Voss's mind raced. They needed a distraction, a final, decisive blow. It came to him in an instant. "Talos," he barked. "Prepare the Triumph for a high-risk assault. We're going straight for their flagship." The plan was dangerous. The Triumph was fast, but a direct engagement with a dreadnought would be suicide. Yet if they could take down the flagship, the rest of the fleet would scatter, leaderless and vulnerable. "You heard him," Talos said to the crew. "Brace for impact." With a roar of engines, the Triumph cut through the heart of the Zalthari fleet, dodging fire and weaving between their ships. It was a gamble, a game of life and death. But the stakes had never been higher. This was humanity's last chance to break the Zalthari's stranglehold on the galaxy. As they closed in on the enemy flagship, Voss's heart pounded in his chest. The future of humanity was on the line, and there was no turning back now. The battle raged on with a ferocity that only the desperate could understand. The Zalthari Empire, bruised but not broken, had unleashed their full might, and the coalition forces were pushed to their limits. Commander Elias Voss could feel the weight of every decision pressing on him as he watched the conflict unfold before him. The Triumph shook from enemy fire, yet still, they pressed on, knowing that a single misstep could doom their cause. The Zalthari had learned from their previous defeat. They adapted swiftly, responding with terrifying efficiency. The dreadnoughts, massive, looming ships of unmatched firepower, formed the core of their assault, laying waste to anything in their path. The coalition forces, while fast and nimble, had never faced such raw power before. This was a different kind of war, one where strategy alone wouldn't be enough. The Zalthari came for vengeance. "We've got incoming," Talos shouted from the command center, her voice tense but controlled. 5 dreadnoughts, closing fast. Voss didn't flinch. "Brace for impact." "But we don't back down." He watched the holographic display as the dreadnoughts advanced, their massive forms casting shadows across the battlefield. The Triumph danced through the chaos, its agile form darting in and out of the barrage of fire, outmaneuvering enemy shots with expert precision. Every move was deliberate, but the sheer scale of the Zalthari fleet was overwhelming. Kairos, ever the strategist, glanced over at Voss, his expression sharp. "They're closing in. We need to create a diversion, or we'll be trapped. If they surround us, we're finished." Voss nodded, his mind racing. He could feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just a battle for survival. It was a battle to prove that humanity was not to be underestimated. He glanced at the Gervani and Targoth officers, their faces set in grim determination. The Allied forces had fought hard to get this far, but the Zalthari weren't going to let them win without a fight. "Initiate the counterattack," Voss ordered, his voice cold and resolute. "We take out their flank and make our way to their flagship. That's where their command lies. Disrupt their leadership, and we can break them." The coalition fleet split into smaller units, each one executing a precise maneuver to flank the advancing Zalthari. The human ships, guided by Captain Talos' flawless tactics, launched a barrage of missiles that hit their mark with deadly precision, targeting weak points in the dreadnought's armor. The Gervana's advanced weaponry provided the perfect cover, launching targeted strikes from a distance while the Targoths surged into close-quarters combat, tearing through enemy ships with brutal efficiency. For a moment, it seemed as though the tide might turn in their favor. The Zalthari fleet, disoriented by the coalition's unexpected ferocity, began to fracture. Their once coordinated assault faltered, and Voss could see the cracks in their formation. But just as victory seemed within reach, the Zalthari revealed their true strength. "They're deploying reinforcements," Kyrus warned, eyes scanning the tactical map. "More dreadnoughts, more cruisers, it's a full-scale retaliation." Voss clenched his fists. The Zalthari weren't simply retaliating, they were sending everything they had. This wasn't just a counteroffensive. It was a final, desperate attempt to crush the rebellion and regain their dominance. "We need to get to their flagship now," Voss growled. "Everything we've fought for, everything humanity has sacrificed, is riding on this moment." With the enemy reinforcements on the way, the Triumph pushed forward, cutting through the Zalthari defenses. The ship groaned as enemy fire battered its shields, but it held strong, its weapons cutting down enemy ships with precision strikes. Voss stood firm at the helm, every fiber of his being focused on the task at hand. He knew they couldn't afford to falter. The Zalthari flagship was the heart of their empire. Take it out, and their forces would crumble. "Prepare for boarding," Voss commanded. "It's time to end this." The Triumph broke through the last line of Zalthari defense and locked onto the massive flagship. Humanity's warriors had come this far, but this final assault would test everything they had. As the Triumph closed in, a sense of inevitability hung in the air. This would be the defining moment of a war. The boarding teams, led by elite human and Targoth forces, prepared to breach the flagship. Voss knew that once they boarded, there would be no turning back. It was either victory or annihilation. As the doors to the flagship's docking bay slid open, Voss's pulse quickened. His team stormed in, blasters raised and eyes focused. The Zalthari would fight to the death to protect their leader, but Voss and his warriors were prepared for this moment. The sound of battle filled the corridors as human and Zalthari forces collided. With every step they took, Voss could feel the power of humanity's resolve. They would not be crushed.
They would not be enslaved.
They were warriors, and warriors would never stop fighting. The corridors of the Zalthari flagship were a maelstrom of violence. The sound of weapons clashing, the hum of energy shields, and the thunder of explosions filled the air as humanity's warriors pushed deeper into the heart of their enemy's stronghold. Commander Elias Voss led the charge, his every step bringing them closer to the central command room where the fate of the galaxy would be decided. The Zalthari fought with all the ferocity they had left. Their once imposing numbers had dwindled, but the warriors of the Empire, proud and relentless, were still a force to be reckoned with. Yet, no matter how fierce the resistance, humanity's resolve was stronger. Voss gritted his teeth as he ducked behind a barricade, firing at an approaching Zalthari soldier. "Push forward," he shouted to his team. "We're almost there." Talos, ever the tactician, led her squad to flank their enemies, cutting through the opposition with surgical precision. Her eyes were steady, but Voss could see the strain in her posture. She knew what was at stake. One wrong move, and everything they'd fought for would be lost. But they didn't falter. Humanity had never faltered. The battle continued to rage as they pushed forward, each step bringing them closer to the heart of the flagship. Every corner was a deadly gamble, every doorway a potential ambush. But they were prepared. The human spirit burned bright, and it was a fire that no empire could extinguish. The central command room doors were finally within sight, and the tension in the air was palpable. They had taken out the outer defenses, but the hardest challenge lay ahead. Inside, the Zalthari High Command waited, the last line of defense standing between them and victory. "We're almost there," Voss muttered, his voice tight with anticipation. Suddenly, the doors to the command room slid open with a hiss, revealing the chamber where the future of the galaxy would be decided. The room was vast, filled with holographic projections and a commanding view of the battlefield outside. At the far end, seated upon a massive throne-like chair, was the Zalthari Emperor. He was a towering figure, his skin shimmering with a silvery sheen, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. His presence was commanding, his very being radiating power. But as his gaze locked onto Voss, there was no fear in the human commander's eyes, only defiance. "You are too late," the Emperor's voice boomed, echoing in the chamber. "The Zalthari will rise again. Your rebellion is nothing more than a fleeting spark in the darkness." Voss stepped forward, his voice steady and resolute. "The spark that will burn your empire to the ground." The final confrontation had begun. The battle inside the command room was brutal. The Emperor's elite guards, formidable and deadly, charged with blinding speed, their weapons crackling with energy. But the humans were faster, their tactics sharper. They had come too far to be stopped now. Voss and Talos fought side by side, each taking down enemies with swift precision. It was a deadly dance, a fight for the future of all sentient life in the galaxy. At last, with a final push, they reached the Emperor. His guards had fallen, his power waning, but his eyes still burned with an unrelenting fire. "You cannot win," the Emperor hissed, his voice dripping with contempt. "You are but ants beneath my feet." Voss stepped closer, his hand resting on the hilt of his blade. "Ants that learn to strike." In one swift motion, Voss lunged forward, driving his blade deep into the Emperor's chest. The Zalthari ruler's body convulsed, his regal facade cracking as he let out a final, guttural scream. His reign was over. The silence that followed was deafening. Voss stood over the fallen Emperor, his chest heaving with the adrenaline of the battle. The command room was in ruins, but humanity had prevailed. Against all odds, they had taken down the mightiest empire the galaxy had ever known. Talos approached, her expression a mix of exhaustion and triumph. "It's over," she said softly, her voice filled with awe. Voss nodded, his eyes scanning the wreckage. "It's over, but the work is just beginning." Back aboard the Triumph, Voss looked out at the stars, his mind focused on what lay ahead. The war was won, but the galaxy was still reeling from the devastation. Rebuilding would take time, effort, and sacrifice, but humanity had proven something that day. They had proven that no empire, no matter how vast or powerful, could stand against the determination and will of a few determined humans. Humanity had become legends among the stars, and the universe would never forget the warriors who dared to defy the impossible.